Hello, everyone. Many of you have, I know, followed the parliamentary elections in Sweden. Now, to speak about the results and to help us understand what this means for the country and for Sweden's place in the world, I'm delighted to receive Éric Adamson. He's project manager at the Atlantic Council's Northern European office based in Stockholm. Hello, Éric.
Thank you so much for having me. Great to be back with AJC as well.
Wonderful. Éric, let's start out with a very, very simple question. When you ask most people across the world who are not necessarily following, exactly what's going on in Sweden closely, they will probably most say, Sweden is all about social welfare, about social democracy. Yet, despite the fact things are slightly different with as we can see in the outcome of the elections, and I think many people are surprised that, in particular, the far right, the Swedish Democrats, did so well. Could you explain to us why that happened? How you explain that, just for us to understand, how we got there?
Sure. So in Sweden, the campaigning has been completely focused on law and order and criminality, similar rhetoric to what you might hear in the United States. This has been in large part because in voters' minds, the connection between increased immigration and rising levels of crime and violent crime. So there has been an increasing number of shootings in the Swedish suburbs connected to different gangs and drug trade. And this is what has been fueling, in many senses, the rise of the far right, that such issues have been not talked about so much in Sweden amongst the mainstream parties. And that has changed in recent years, where the center right has begun speaking about it, but this has been a core issue for the far right for quite some time. And when it becomes the #1 and #2 election issue in Sweden, then we can expect the Sweden Democrats to make gains when it is such a central role in society.
Sure. So now, what does it mean? Where do we stand now? What does it mean for Sweden? What can be the outcome in terms of a coalition, in terms of the government, and domestically, and from a policy perspective, what does that mean? What would that mean for Sweden?
Mm. So right now, it seems like we have about 1 seat in government that will be the difference between a center-right coalition or a center-left coalition. Unlike in Germany, a grand coalition between the 2 largest parties, the Social Democrats and the moderates, which are actually now the 3rd largest party, with the Sweden Democrats overtaking, such a grand coalition is not politically feasible. This has to do with the Social Democrats having been in power for so long, and the center-right parties set on having a change in governments. What this means is that the center-right will be reliant upon the passive support of the Sweden Democrats. They will not be a full member of governments, but the Sweden Democrats will abstain in voting to let a center-right government form. This is giving them political influence and breaking with a long-standing taboo in Swedish politics to allow a far-right party this amount of influence. Policy-wise, the center-right and the far-right actually agree on quite a lot when it comes to migration, giving police more resources to fight crime, more police powers and rights to crack down on crime. Policy-wise, the center-right has shifted and taken a harder turn towards the right. So there's quite a lot of overlap and agreements amongst the center-right parties. Now,
as we are a Jewish organization. There's a very small Jewish community in Sweden. What's the state of mind there? How concerned are they, particularly knowing, the roots also of the Sweden?
Yeah, so a great deal of concern. The Jewish community is, of course, sensitive to far right and their rhetoric, perhaps more so than general Swedish society. Much like elsewhere in Europe, the far right will try to capitalize upon their hard stance against migrants and use that as an issue, saying, hey, we're hard against Muslim communities who are also problematic for the Jewish communities, therefore you should vote for us. But when you have that and continuous series of incidents, just to name one example, a member of parliament hosting a fika, coffee and cakes, commemorating the start of World War II, well, then it raises some alarm bells amongst the Jewish community. It isn't just the far right. Another concerning trend is in the Swedish suburbs, where a Islamist party gained 20% of the votes at the local elections, not a national level, but this is also a concerning trend for the Jewish community. So you have both the far right and an Islamist party that is making some inroads at the local level, at least.
So as everywhere, they're squeezed.
Yeah.
And just one last question. Sweden will be taking up the presidency of the European Union as well. And there has been obviously the issue of Sweden joining NATO. Is the fact that there will be a new government, that there will be a new coalition, will this have consequences on a geopolitical level?
The center-right is pretty good on defense issues, increasing defense spending and going into NATO. The Sweden Democrats are EU skeptics. And as you mentioned, Sweden will be hosting the EU presidency, but this agenda is quite set, and I don't foresee the Sweden Democrats having the political capital to throw up too many roadblocks. It is a concern more long-term. If with a fairly weak government, when you're holding on to power with one seat, if they might use that political leverage to create problems in the future, if they see themselves dropping in the polls, but the immediate effects, there won't be any opposition to NATO from a center-right government. Just there might be some instability farther down the road, which is the larger issue. Sweden is going into NATO. The first steps, we would like some political stability to upend 200 years of non-military alignment.
Who would have thought instability goes with Sweden? In any case, thank you very much, Éric, for having taken the time to speak to us. I know the world is looking at you as we speak. And so I thank you very much for having spoken to us today.
Pleasure's all mine. Thank you so much, Simone.
Bye-bye.